Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. We've got about 15 people online so far. We're not going to keep you waiting. It is 2 o'clock. My name is Vinesh. I'm the Business Development Manager for New Image International. And we've got an awesome call for you today. We've got our wonderful network doctor for New Image International, Dr. Anthony Harper, who does most of our talks on colostrum. He's going to be chatting to you today on metabolic syndrome, right? And like a lot of people, understanding what that is, how it works, and how you can combat it. Doc's going to tell us all about that today. Doc, if you are there, I'll hand over to you immediately. I know you have so much information to share, so it's all yours. Take it away.
Well, hi Vinesh, thank you very much. Just give me a thumbs up there if everything is good and you can hear me loud and clear.
Loud and clear, Doc. All good.
100%. And greetings today on a Saturday afternoon. Here we are in Pretoria. It is really a scorcher, very, very hot here today. So here we are. We are looking forward to spending some time with you guys. And I do see a lot of the names that I normally see at these meetings, and for you guys that attend regularly, my hat's off to you. Thank you so much for the time that you take to join us online and your hunger for learning more and more and more about colostrum. But today I've got a little bit more information to share with you, especially about a topic that is fairly close to my heart, and that is metabolic syndrome. Ultimately, the doctor's guide to optimal health is the big picture, but within that, I want to zoom in and focus on metabolic syndrome. And for those of you that don't really know what it is, it's got a lot to do. You will see towards the latter part of the presentation, we're going to then focus on what colostrum can do for you to try and alleviate the problems that are associated with metabolic syndrome. So what I'm going to do is jump right in. You'll be able to see a little picture right at the top of the rather expanded waistline of our generic guy with high blood pressure, high glucose, high lipid profiles, large waist, and low HDL levels. And we're going to explain more about that because it's very, very relevant. And when you see the numbers, you'll soon appreciate that 1 in 3 people battles with metabolic syndrome, and the problem is they don't even know about it. So let's jump into our next slide. And for those of you that don't know who I am, I don't want to spend too much time on who I am. It's about sharing the rest of the information, but basically, my speciality is on mind-body medicine, functional and integrative medicine, where we look at the entire person instead of just looking at their symptoms. We're also looking to deal with the cause of their problems and not just the symptoms. And this is really one of my big challenges in dealing with patients, is trying to get away from these conventional methods of treating symptoms. I know that the average doctor generally, has very limited time with a patient and ends up just dealing with prescription medicine. But functional medicine and integrative medicine are very, very different. We try and look beyond that, because if we can't help why your condition is the way that it is, then we can't really help you. And in that regard, we also like to focus on the spiritual, mental, and emotional aspects of who you are. That's what makes you. So that's a little bit about me. And what I'd like to say as well is that the information that you're seeing today, I've spent a good few hours during the course of the week accumulating a lot of this information from various sources to be able to put it to you in a way that is not too complicated and not too technical. Because often the doctors get very, very wrapped up in the technicalities of information. And for those of you that are not really medically minded, might not be able to follow things too clearly. So we like to break them down and keep them very, very simple. So I hope that that's the message that comes across today, is simplicity and understanding. And these will be the topics that we're going to speak about today. So just to run through them, we're going to talk about the facts about insulin and fat burning, how the body uses energy, the role of hormones and what they play in weight loss, what blood labs, when you go to the local pathology lab, what are the names of the bloods that you should look for that we will recommend to you as well to help you diagnose metabolic syndrome. And that would be the next question. How do we diagnose it? So it's actually quite simple. And why is metabolic syndrome such a problem? We'll explain that too. What is insulin resistance? A lot of you may have heard of that term, but not quite sure how it works. We'll get into that. And obviously that leads us on to discussing sugar as the silent killer and how to reverse metabolic syndromes. All very well knowing about the condition, but if we don't know how to fix it or how to reverse it, then it's pretty pointless. So, getting into the nitty-gritty, what is colostrum's part in metabolic syndrome, and what is the famous trilogy that New Image has and puts together to help deal with it? Then we'll share a few lifestyle and dietary tips. Sounds like I've been drinking this afternoon. TRPS, not trips, tips. So let's jump into the next slide. So this is really the focus on metabolic syndrome regarding your health. So pay attention, guys. There's a lot of information to go through, and we really, really want to keep it simple so that you can get the gist of how this works. So what is metabolic syndrome? Let's start with the definition. So it's a cluster, a combination of conditions that increases the risk of heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes. So what are the conditions? What are the things that we look at? So obviously there's number one, an increased blood pressure, and we'll get to the parameters of these in a moment. I just want to break them down so you've just got an overview of what we're talking about. High blood sugar, excess fat around the waistline, and abnormal cholesterol and triglyceride levels. The alarming point here is that the statistics show that 1 in 3 people have metabolic syndrome. Is that one possibly you? Well, let's see. We hope not. We really, if you think you fit into this category once we've gone through how to measure it, at least you'll have some info on how to deal with it. So let's jump into the next slide. So here we go, guys. I want you to also pay attention to the little chat box on the right-hand side of the screen if you guys have got it open, because I'm going to ask a question now. The risk factors for metabolic syndrome have one hormone that will cause all the primary risk factors. So there are 2 names for it, and I want you to write it in to the chat box. If you have the chat box open, the answer will be on the next slide. So give that some thought for a moment, because you might be surprised as to what that one hormone is. Right, I don't see any answers coming through yet. Right, here we go. Insulin. So Rena Otto, well done. Shamima, actually, the primary one is insulin, and it's also called hyperinsulinemia, insulinemia. So this is the number 1 hormone that actually affects all of this. So we're gonna dive into how insulin actually causes all of this. Right. So maybe to start with, a good question would be, what is the primary role of insulin? All right, what is the primary role of insulin? So it would be 2 questions. Is it to lower blood sugar, or is it to block any other form of any energy utilization in the body? So if you want to type into your chat box, would it be A or would it be B? Give that some thought for a moment, because you might be pleasantly surprised at what this answer actually is. So any takers, anybody wanting to take a stab at A or B? Is it to lower blood sugar, or is it to block any other form of energy utilization? Right, that's quite important. So, right, the answer is actually B, believe it or not. Its primary role is not just to lower blood sugar, but it blocks all forms of any other energy utilization in the body. So maybe that's come as a surprise to you. And the other question we have is, if insulin is high in the body, can you still burn fat? Very good question. So if anybody has any answers to that, so there we go. Let's jump into the next one. So the laws of physiology, guys, and the way you use energy in the body is as follows. If your insulin is high, you cannot burn fat. It is a physiological fact. You cannot burn fat. So part of what you'll see a bit later on is we would recommend a low-carb ketogenic diet to reduce blood glucose. And it also, in turn, will reduce the need for insulin. So maybe that's a surprise to you. So if you ever get your insulin checked, and remember, it would be fasting insulin for at least 14 hours before you do a lab on your insulin. All right. So what we also want to be clear with is how this all works in the body. So the laws of physiology state there is a hierarchy of how your body uses glucose and glycogen and lean muscle and things like that, because this is quite important to understand. So there is an order to this. So when your body uses energy, the first thing it's going to do is to use the glucose in your blood. It will always start with that. It's its number one place that it goes to look for utilizing glucose. If it's not in your blood, it's going to go to the glycogen, which is the stored glucose in your liver and muscles. If it hasn't got the first two, it's then going to use lean muscle for energy, for fuel. And by the time it gets down to that, that's certainly not the best idea, is to start burning lean muscle for energy. We don't want to do that. Why? Because it takes 3 minutes to liquefy muscle, but 5 hours to use fat as fuel. So there's a very, very different directive here in how the body utilizes energy. So we want to really use fat for fuel. And this is where the ketogenic diet is aimed at, is using fat as fuel. And we'll get to a little bit more about that as we move on. But I wanted to just share a little bit of the physiology so that you've got a deeper understanding of how your body uses glucose or glycogen. And remember, glycogen is just stored glucose, but in the liver. Right. So here we go. So there's also a few other hormones that are involved in how they influence metabolism and influence your appetite and your hunger. And again, we start with insulin, because this is a hormone that influences your metabolism. And insulin resistance also increases the risk of obesity. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment. The other hormones that we don't often hear about are called leptin and ghrelin. So leptin is, it's an appetite suppressant, basically, that controls your appetite and tells you when you're full. Ghrelin is the opposite of that. It tells you when you're hungry, but often these levels and these hormones go out of whack. So we're going to focus on cortisol, number 3. That's the stress hormone, and that can also influence weight. So we all know that when you stress and you're really stressed out of your mind, your cortisol levels go up. And when your cortisol levels goes up, what happens? Your glucose increases. So we're back to square one again. So we don't want to have that. You've got to keep your cortisol at a decent level. So women with low estrogen levels during and after menopause may experience weight gain as well. And men with low testosterone, they often lose muscle mass and gain body fat. And if your hormones are imbalanced, it is almost impossible to lose weight. And I was at an integrative medicine conference about 2 months ago, and I remember the presenter talking about this point. and saying, you know, in the years that he's been practicing, the one thing has been very, very clear, and that if your hormones are out of balance, it is almost impossible to lose body fat. I'm not saying weight, because that's a general weight on the scale, and when you lose muscle mass, that's not what you want to lose. We are talking primarily about body fat. So we're aiming to lose body fat, not the hard-earned lean muscle mass. Right. Let's move on to the next slide. So what are the labs that we're going to suggest that you look for? All right. So you're going to start with fasting glucose, hemoglobin A1C, a lipid panel, which would be your cholesterol and triglycerides, a fasting insulin, and serum ferritin. We'll talk a little bit about that in the moment. And then we're also going to share with you what the results of those would be. In other words, what are optimal ranges, what are high ranges, because you need to educate yourself as well. Don't just leave it up to your doctor. Understand what is optimal and suboptimal, what's high, what's low. And I can certainly share with you, in my experience, is many of the labs' ranges differ hugely as to what they consider an optimal range is. So if we're going to be giving you an average score, it's going to be the average. There's a very, very big difference between optimal, and every human being should be aiming to be in an optimal range, not the range of the norm. That's a very, very big difference. So when we refer to nutritional deficiencies, often the FDA will have a suggestion of what they think the range should be. But I can promise you that 95% of the time, they are way out. So optimal is something completely different. The human body needs to be functioning optimally. So that's what we're going to focus on. So if we jump onto the next slide. So here it is, guys. If you want to, I think the presentation, by the way, is going to be made available to you. So if you're trying to write things down, you know, when you see a slide like this with a whole lot of data and you're trying to follow it, I'm pretty sure Vanessa is going to share this particular PowerPoint with you so that you can go back to these slides and just refresh your memory. So how do we diagnose metabolic syndrome? So it goes like this. When you have 3 or more of the following 5 risk factors, you will be diagnosed with metabolic syndrome. We're going to start with the abdominal obesity. If men are over 102 centimeters round the waist, that's round the sort of navel area. If you exceed that, that's your first checkbox. Women, if you are over 88 centimeters, that will be your first checkbox. Then we move on to high triglycerides. All right, anything over 1.5 millimoles per liter will be considered a marker for high triglycerides. And low LDL, not just total cholesterol. The focus here is on HDL, which is one component of cholesterol. If you have a low cholesterol, men, if it is under 1 or 1.04, we want a high HDL, not a low LDL. All right. So remember, the LDL is the other way around. So if we have more time at some stage, we can discuss this cholesterol because it's very, very confusing to people. Women, if you are under 1.29 millimoles per liter, that would be considered very, very low for you. Moving on to blood pressure. If your blood pressure is over 130 over 85, anything over that is an additional marker. And obviously, high fasting glucose would be over 5.6. So if it's 5.7, 5.8, 5.9, you would be considered having high sugar. But there are 2 additional bloods that, if possible, if you're going to go to the extent of measuring your blood, I would really suggest looking at an additional 2 tests, and that is elevated fasting insulin, all right, and ferritin, which is your iron. So your fasting insulin, now this is when you get a much better picture in this diagnosis. When your fasting insulin is you can see I've put the optimum would be 5.6 under 5, right? Under 5 is optimum, but when you're between 7 and 10, that's considered mild. 11 to 15 is moderate, and anything over 15 in your score is considered severe and high. All right, so it's a really important marker to have. And elevated ferritin. And ferritin is a glycoprotein that carries the iron stores, and we certainly do not want elevated ferritin at all, because it's very damaging to tissues. It creates oxidative stress, and these start to damage tissue, particularly in the pancreas. As you know, the pancreas is where you produce insulin, and the beta cells in the pancreas. So if they get damaged and they can't produce enough insulin, you really struggle with insulin resistance and the sugar going higher and higher. So I've put the normal levels in adult men, which is generally between 30 and 300 nanograms per mol, and adult women, normal range between 13 and 150. So if your ferritin comes back quite a bit over that, you would have elevated ferritin. So I hope that makes sense, because these are really almost the standard method that your doctor would check for if he were to diagnose you with metabolic syndrome. So quite simple, very, very simple test to do. They're not complicated bloods. Most of the labs do these quite comfortably, so you should be able to go to any pathology lab. And well, you don't need to go to a lab to measure your waistline, but you will need it for triglycerides, for HDL. Blood pressure you can do at home, guys. If you've got your own blood pressure kits, you can check your blood pressure as a start. But the fasting insulin and elevated ferritin you will need to do at a lab. All right, next slide. So let's just look a little bit closer. So we also have, just to kind of put you in the picture, when you hear of A1C or HbA1c, it's the same thing, hemoglobin. This is glycated sugar in the blood, which gives you, it's a score which is pretty accurate for blood sugar, because it is the average blood sugar that you are measured for over a 3-month period. So it's a very good indicator of what your blood sugar is all about, instead of just your glucose at the time, which is affected by your meals, but this is your average score over 3 months. So if we look at the slide next door, this is to do with, you'll see the blue one, the green one, and then diabetes. So this is to do with your fasting blood sugar, not your A1C. So if your sugar is below 5.6, this is generally postprandial, 2 hours, an hour and a half to 2 hours after your meal, and you measure your sugar and you're consistently around 5.6 or under, you're doing well. If your sugar is starting to climb between 5.6 and 6.9, you're starting to hit into what we call type 2 or pre-diabetes. And then obviously anything from 7 and upwards, you'll start to have to look very carefully at your state. But A1C is very reliable. The HbA1c also gives us additional information. It's not just for blood. We don't really have too much time for that right now, but it can really tell us about what else is being glycated in the body as far as your sugar is concerned in other areas of the body. So most people know A1C just to do your average blood sugar, but it's an indicator of other stuff that's going on in the body as well. Right at the bottom of the screen, we're saying, let's talk a little bit about statins and the cholesterol myth. Well, I've said the cholesterol myth. This is not just what I'm saying. A lot of the new integrative medicine doctors and functional medicine doctors are really looking at cholesterol very, very differently to what they used to look at it. In other words, it was considered a risk marker for cardiovascular disease. But what's coming up now is very, very different. There's actually been a few books written about cholesterol. We believe that the pharmaceutical industry has really cashed in on statins, and prescribed far too many statins to try and control cholesterol. And just in essence, guys, when you prescribe a statin, there's a lot of side effects that happen in the liver. The side effects are actually worse than trying to control the cholesterol. The biggest problem here is that if you drop your cholesterol too low, you now struggle to produce and make hormones. That is a problem. Sorry, I've just had a pop-up on the screen here. So all the hormones are first cholesterol molecules. So can you imagine how this affects your hormone levels if you have very, very low cholesterol? Cholesterol is there to protect you. Okay, it is not considered a top level high risk factor like we were led to believe a good few years ago. It's way down the list of risk. And in fact, when we look at certain parts of cholesterol, there's only the VLDL, very low density lipid, that gets oxidized, that could be a potential issue, but can be fixed. So to say, straight off the bat that cholesterol is a risk factor, Tim Noakes, Professor Tim Noakes is talking about this a lot. There's a lot of the doctors online that are saying exactly the same thing. The moment they reduce cholesterol in patients, they tend to find the hormone levels, the hormones really struggle. So not a good idea. So I hope that makes sense to you. This is just the basics of our cholesterol chart, and I'm not going to go through every single one of them. I think you've got the message. We want, reasonable levels of cholesterol. And I think that if one has got super high cholesterol up at 7 or 8, it may be deserved looking at. But certainly when you consider anything above 5.5 and 5.6 or 5.7, and that's considered high, this is where the labs will straight away indicate high cholesterol. And that's when your doctor will take one look at that score and say, let's put you on a statin. We can easily improve our cholesterol score by diet alone, instead of using an external substance to try and control it for you, which does a lot more damage in the liver. So why is metabolic syndrome a problem? Let's have a look at this. So you are at risk for developing the following problems, all right? Neurological problems or disorders, type 2 diabetes, PCOS, which is polycystic ovary syndrome for females, NAFLD, which is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which creates high uric acid, cancer, stroke, and cardiovascular disease. So that's a fairly comprehensive list of risk factors, and nobody wants any one of those. And the rate of cancer and stroke and cardiovascular disease today is becoming really serious. The numbers are astounding, and you can prevent that. So, once you understand what this problem is, you start to see the extent of what metabolic syndrome really is and how far reaching it extends. And if we look at the neurological problems, i.e. Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, all those being conditions that are part of, there we go, metabolic syndrome. All right. So understanding your markers is what we're trying to do here. And in this particular slide, we're talking about high triglycerides. All right. What do we actually mean, high triglycerides? So it's becoming a very, very important marker, because when your triglycerides are too high, you may not have symptoms. It's what we call a silent problem with big implications. And if your triglyceride levels are too high, you have a 4-fold increase in the likelihood of having a heart attack. So let's pay attention. It's also a sign that you're becoming insulin resistant. So if we see high triglycerides, we are saying you are probably insulin resistant. It's also a clue to fatty liver disease, guys. Fatty liver is a big deal. Your liver is certainly not optimal. It is really, really struggling, and we need to deal with a fatty liver disease as well. There's fatty liver or fat in the pancreas that can also affect the how efficient the pancreas is. But right now we're referring to high triglyceride levels above 500 milligrams per deciliter. You are very, very inflammatory, which goes to the pancreas. Now, the pancreas is inflamed and it can't get those little beta cells to produce insulin. So we do not want pancreatitis, which is inflammation of the pancreas, because it causes long-term permanent tissue damage, very difficult to fix. So if you look at the scores underneath, normal is when it is less than 1.6, moderately high from 1.6 to 5.6, and very high when you're above 5.6 triglycerides. So keep that in mind. It's a super, super important marker to look at. All right, so let's just focus a little bit more at this point on insulin resistance to try and understand more about how do we describe what this is? What is the definition of insulin resistance? And basically, it's a condition in which the cells of the body become less responsive to insulin. The mechanism, high insulin causes insulin resistance. All right. How does it develop? Well, especially if you've got a large belly and you're significantly overweight, what we would classify as that obese range, somebody that has a very, very inactive lifestyle. And as I've said before, sitting is the new smoking. Guys, you got to get up. We got to keep moving. The body's not designed to sit. All right, we got to keep the circulation moving. We got to burn up those calories. We got to keep ourselves active. And a diet high in sugar. We're going to be spending a little bit of time on the danger of this killer, which is sugar and carbs, being the primary causes of insulin resistance and inflammation. And the impact of this leads to high blood sugar levels and the potential development of type 2. There's a lot of people walking around with type 2 diabetes and they don't even know it. Very, very problematic thing. This is the cycle. If we look at when you eat your food, you produce insulin. From there, the cells resist the insulin, and then the excess sugar gets stored as fat, which makes you feel tired and hungry, and then you want to go and eat again. So you've got this vicious circle going on and on over months and years in a lot of the cases where people just can't understand why they're packing on so much weight. All right. So this is all about sugar that we call the silent killer. And boy, oh boy, does this cause trouble in the body. What's the impact of it? It has a huge contribution to insulin resistance on your general metabolic health. It is clearly linked to obesity and other chronic diseases. And I think the thing is to focus on what are the common foods and drinks that have high sugar. And I'm putting a question which you can all see on your screen right now. How much sugar is in a 330 ml can of Coke? And do we know people that just love their Coke? Well, let's put it out like this. One 330 ml can of Coke has 35 grams or 35,000 milligrams per 330 mils. Guys, let's put this into perspective. 1 teaspoon has 4 grams of sugar, or 9 teaspoons of sugar. So it would be for 1 can of Coke, you would have 9 teaspoons of sugar. How many people drink the 2-liter Coke and sometimes twice a day? All right, it's 218 grams. There's 1,000 milligrams in a gram. It's 218,000 milligrams of sugar in a 2-liter Coke, which equals 44 teaspoons of sugar in a 2-liter Coke. All right, it's a nightmare. What it's doing to your body is just, it's incredible how much damage is done. And that's just with one one product. All right. So think about this for a moment. Now we move on to another type of sugar. All right. This little screen that hopefully you all can see names 56 different types of sugars and what are the worst. So on the screen, you will see different names of different sugars. There is one in particular that I'm going to focus on because it has enormous damage in the body. If anybody would like to be quick enough on the uptake here to write down in our little chat box what they think the worst sugar is, not necessarily why, we'll get to that in a moment, but there's one in particular. And Rena, you are on the ball, girl. Good for you. I love it. Somebody's done their homework. Fructose. Let's go to the next slide. Well done. All right. Also called high fructose corn syrup. Why? Because, well, number one, its sweetening effect is twice that of glucose. But remember, glucose is quite different. Glucose goes straight into the bloodstream. Fructose has to go to the liver before the liver can convert fructose into glucose. And in that process, in the liver, is where the problems start. So the metabolism happens there. This pathway is what we call uncontrolled. There's nothing stopping it. And it depletes what we call ATP. ATP is an abbreviation for something called adenosine triphosphate, which is the molecule of energy in the body. Okay, ATP is, if you've got enough ATP, you've got enough energy in the body. So when you have a fall in ATP, you have a fall in energy, and this in turn increases uric acid. It causes oxidative stress, and we're talking about fructose, guys. Increase in uric acid, oxidative stress. It inhibits the synthesis of protein. Mitochondrial dysfunction. If anybody knows what a mitochondria is, that is your body's battery. It's the equivalent of the battery in the motor car. In other words, you can have a car that has got a full tank of petrol, but if the battery's flat, you can't start the car. If the batteries in the body and the mitochondria are dysfunctional, you have chronic fatigue, your appetite is really bad, you can't sleep very well. So there's a myriad of functions that happen from mitochondrial dysfunction. And of course, that leads to, it kicks off obesity, it kicks off insulin resistance, and it is a major contributor to fatty liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And of course, and an increase in triglycerides. So if you see the process of eating fructose and what fructose does to you, I hope that you think twice next time. So what is fructose? Fructose comes from fruit. It's a fruit sugar. Let's just jump onto the next slide. So what's the difference between fructose and glucose? Well, fructose actually has a lower GI, glycemic index, of it's only 23 compared to glucose, which is 100. So glucose ingestion is followed by, it gets absorbed very, very quickly, which leads to a small postprandial, which is post-meal, after the meal, rise in blood glucose. Glucose typically leads to fat deposition in the subcutaneous tissue, but fructose leads to de novo fat synthesis in the liver. What on earth does de novo fat synthesis mean? It's just a metabolic process that converts the fructose to glucose in the liver. So it's a little bit of a, it's to do with the excess glucose of carbohydrates, protein, and alcohol that gets converted into fat. That's really what it is. And that gets stored in the liver. So it's always the excess that we're concerned about, the excess fat. Where does it go? So remember, in the human body, you are born with X amount of fat cells. The number of fat cells in your lifetime don't increase, but the size of the fat cells increase. All right. So Another result, interestingly, and I've seen this a few times, what they call an experimental study showed that fructose ingestion reduces leptin levels, unlike glucose. So leptin, as we remember, is a hormone that's your appetite suppressant. And if it reduces leptin, that's what we don't really want. We don't want low leptin because that makes you hungry. So you know, it causes huge implications in the liver and a knock-on effect with everything else. So it's what I consider one of the worst sugars, and you will see this online if you go and Google the implications of fructose. So what does it really mean? I'm thinking about the guys here that like to make their fruit smoothies, okay, and turn it into fructose and then knock back these big jugs of fruit. I want you to really think about what you're doing to your glucose levels and your liver by having copious amounts of fruit. Not a good idea if you're trying to look after metabolic disease. It's a dump on the system. It causes havoc inside, inflammatory status in the gut. It's highly acidic. So I'd really get you to reconsider making these sort of smoothies with loads of fruit. All right, now we need to really think about sugar in a different way because it looks like I'm sitting in the Lancewood yogurt. Oh, goodness me, that would be a first, sitting in a bowl of double cream strawberries and cream yogurt. Foods that have high sugar that you didn't really think about. So the number one of, not that it's number one for being the primary one, but it's a food that we don't think about that is very, very high in sugar. So this particular yogurt, if you notice on the cover, it says no sugar added. That doesn't mean it has no sugar. All right, this particular yogurt has 2.7 grams. Remember, grams and milligrams, there's 1,000 milligrams per gram. So this one has 2,700 milligrams per 100 mil. Okay, big difference. Not in the whole thing, per 100 mil. And most of these nutritive information, when you look at the product and you read it, is talking about 100 grams or 100 mil, things like that. But I want you to look at the ingredients. Start becoming clever about reading ingredients. All right. And right there, I see non-nutritive sweeteners like sucralose. Sucralose is 600 times sweeter than sucrose, just sugar. 600 times more sweet. This is what you are consuming. All right. Flavorings, colorant, acidity regulators, modified starch, which is modified cornstarch, which is fructose. Okay. So when you start adding in fruit into your yogurt, it transforms the level of sugar in that product. So there's the note right at the bottom, 600 times sweeter. Okay, quite an important one to think about there. So my opinion would be that anything that is non-nutritive or any sweet note, stay away from. It's actually better just to have sugar, to be quite honest. Some of these derivatives are really not cool. They can hurt your system. All right. Now, bread. Who would think that there's sugar in bread? All right. You just need to go and look at the information or go and read your label. Probably one of the worst because there's an average of about 5 grams per slice. So a healthy bread slice shouldn't contain more than 2 or 3 grams of sugar per slice. So try and get information on your bread, on top of which it's a refined carbohydrate. It's going to push up your glucose anyway, but they do add sugar to it. All right. Now, there we go. Protein bars, guys. If you have ever purchased protein bars and you go and see the amount of sugar that is stuffed into your protein bar, that would generally contain more sugar than a donut, 15 to 20 grams of sugar in some cases for a protein bar. I don't say that this particular one that's on the screen is the culprit, but most of the protein bars have a high level of sugar. And you know, if it doesn't have sugar, it's not going to taste nice at all. So generally they do load it so that you can actually consume it. I'd rather not have any sugar in a protein bar at all, because it's a nasty combination to add sugar to a protein. All right, your tomato sauce bottles, some of the worst they've got, and a lot of the sauces that go into foods also have huge amounts of sugar. And the one I'm referring to here is, we all know our South African brand, All Gold, has 21.3 grams per serving. That's an enormous amount of sugar. And 0.3 grams of salt and 4.1 grams, that's 1 teaspoon of sugar in a tablespoon of ketchup, guys. So don't underestimate the amount of sugar that you are going to consume when you're putting your tomato sauce all over your food. We thought that you might like this slide here. My wife actually showed me this one, and I decided to put it into the presentation because I thought it would break the ice a little bit. Assuming that kids consume an enormous amount of sugar, and we wouldn't want to put a kid into the boiling pot. It would be way too much sugar. So there we go. Right, and another interesting topic: carbohydrates. Are they necessary? Well, I'm beginning to think not. I think if you're dealing with high sugar, insulin resistance, all those sort of things, then you might want to rethink the type of carbohydrates that you consume. What is the source of your carbohydrates? Are they simple or are they complex? What about fat for energy? And the way things are going, guys, is that fat is the route where people are wanting to go to burn fat as fuel instead of burning carbohydrates, because your performance increases, your duration of your performance increases. And as Professor Tim Noakes has said, remember his early days, he used to really punt carbohydrates until he became diabetic, affected his running performance massively, but also started to affect his health tremendously. So he's had to say, I'm sorry, that wasn't the right information. We now want to aim at using quality fats as fuel, because it's a much more reliable, especially for athletes. The endurance changes, their strength increases and things like that. So his comment was, it's not proteins and fats, but rather carbohydrates and sugars that are the culprits of ill health and obesity. So I hope you pay attention to this and really consider where you're getting your carbs from and what they might be doing to your health. This is a very interesting graph of how different food groups affect the spiking of insulin. So you will see from top to bottom, you have the increase in glucose levels, and from left to right is the duration. And obviously your red line indicates carbohydrates being the highest spike of sugar for insulin. In the middle, you've got the blue, which is your proteins, and right at the bottom, the least amount of insulin is going to be from fats. So hence, very clear, carbohydrates are a problem. And if you're trying to get your insulin score down, you best think about reducing your carbs considerably to get your insulin under control. So how do we reverse metabolic syndrome? We would remove all sugars, we remove all grains, remove all vegetable oils. We're going to attempt at least fasting for 16 hours a day. And my recommendation, more and more these days, is going to be considering eating animal protein, red meat and eggs. More of that and less of the carbohydrates. You guys have probably heard about the move now to carnivore. And that's certainly 95% of my diet at this stage, and I'm doing very well on it. So I know Vinesh said to me earlier on, Doc, how are we keeping the age side of things looking so good? I believe it's from the diet. I believe it's from the exercise and lifestyle. So when you pay attention to that, you will live longer. I can promise you that. The following are the oils. Now, guys, I know this is a problem for some people, trying to get it through to them that the healthy oils are the following oils. So we're looking at grass-fed butter, and I'm looking at the green for what you should be cooking in. Tallow is fantastic, a fantastic butter to cook in as a rendered animal fat. Coconut oil and ghee butter, because they don't change the constitution when you raise the heat. The other two, olive oil and avocado oil, you certainly do not cook with them, but you can use those two on your salads and dressings. That is it, guys. All the other seed oils, your sunflower oil, all the other oils that you consume are highly, highly inflammatory and are going to hurt you. So please consider changing your oils, get the inflammation in your body down, and just focus on using these oils in your kitchen. Right. What can you do at home that is not going to cost you anything? All right. So your lifestyle side of things would be regular physical activity, your healthy eating, managing your weight, and certainly managing your stress. What would you do to manage your stress? Well, I think exercise is part of that, but how to relax, meditation, sunshine, grounding, in other words, standing on the grass outside in your own home, if you've got grass, earthing yourself is a fantastic way of being able to calm down. Tracking your own blood sugar, you can certainly do at home if you've got your own little glucose meter. If you want to keep a food diary, it's a fantastic way of tracking your food. I can't tell you, when you ask somebody, what did they have for breakfast yesterday or supper last night? Most people don't even know what they've eaten the day before. So how would you track what you've eaten? So a diary is really good. And keeping check, what we say, regular self-assessment, make sure that you're keeping in line. What are your symptoms looking like? What is your brain fog like? Are you able to think clearly? What is your general state of energy like? You know, can't you sleep at night? Sleep is critical as well. All right, so now we get into some nitty-gritty information, guys, and this is where part of the resolution, the resolve, the contribution to fixing everything starts to happen with our wonderful product range from New Image. And what are their product ranges or specific products that can help restore insulin production and reduce insulin resistance? So we talk about what we call the famous trilogy, the famous three, starting with what everybody knows is the, well, the people on this call should all know the Alpha Lipid Lifeline Colostrum. And I'm just going to move myself up out of the way here a little bit. And so without getting into too many technical details, your Alpha Lipid Lifeline Colostrum contains a substance called IGF-1. And this is clearly shown to bind to the cell surface of the cells and to command the proteins inside the cell to regulate glucose. So it builds new cells and it helps you to restore damaged cells like pancreas cells. So traditionally, we find that diabetics, when tested for IGF, traditionally have a very, very low level of IGF-1. So when you start putting the colostrum back into the system, those levels start to rise. And we have seen countless testimonials from those wonderful people who had the challenges in their life of battling with diabetes and started to switch over to using colostrum. And we found that in the beginning stages, the glucose was all over the place, but they had a very, very fast response in how their body was starting to regulate and respond to the colostrum, which contains IGF-1, and a lot of times it's starting to restore those beta cells, those damaged cells that we thought were dead and buried in the pancreas, and the insulin is starting to get produced again back in the pancreas. And that's a critically important thing. And we've seen it over and over again. I love hearing those testimonials of people that shared their journey of recovery. And those were type 1 diabetics. So if you're a type 2, you have an opportunity to reverse that and fix that. The CellWorks is the spray just under the tongue, which consists of proline-rich polypeptides. And these peptides are communication proteins and sugars that assist in the communication inside cells as well as between cells. So it also directs the immune system and is critically important in autoimmune diseases. It brings back the intelligence, and I know that Dr. Stefan Skuman talks about the intelligence in the immune system, and he knows this all too well as well, that when you bring the intelligence back to the immune system, it stops the attack on the pancreas that causes type 1 diabetes, right? And then the third product is Colostrum. This little guy here, everybody knows this. So this is part of the trio. We've got your Alpha Lipid Lifeline Colostrum can. This is the main one. So with these three products, these are the three that we have had phenomenal results with in dealing with lowering triglycerides, lowering blood sugar, and at a lot of the time is being able to restore your insulin levels and help your body. So there we go, guys. There they are. This is not an in-depth study on each one of them, but more about which are the products that we focus on to really help us manage our sugar, amongst other things. This is just one part of it. So let's remember the basic components of colostrum. Well, the basics are they've got all the essential fats, they've got all the basic essential amino acids in them, 87 growth factors, guys. That's unheard of. Where do you get 87 growth factors in a product? And 98 immune factors. On the IGF-1 side of things, as I said, we stimulate tissue repair, so it's there to help. Remember, IGF-1 is a growth factor, so it's there to grow and repair tissue. It is also responsible for lean muscle growth. It has certainly shown on studies the capacity to increase strength and endurance for athletes, and certainly stimulates your metabolism to burn more body fat. So those are the basics. The studies clearly show that colostrum will reduce glucose in type 2 and type 1. I've seen numerous studies of this. I've kept them all. I'm not going to share all these studies with you because I feel it's unnecessary. I think we've got more than enough evidence, not only in the people that we deal with, guys, but the studies confirm exactly what people benefit from. All right, so there you go. If you've got any concerns about whether your colostrum will assist you with reducing glucose and triglycerides and assisting your insulin, most definitely, it does all of that. And currently, at least 1 out of 3 people will develop the disease, in diabetes. So it's the numbers are changing hugely. 1 in 3. Wow, that's huge. All right, we're getting close to the end here. A little bit more focus on IGF-1 in the new Image Colostrum. So this is a hormone that your body makes naturally. It's also called somatomedin C. So if you hear of that word, it is also IGF, and it comes from the liver. And because it's IGF, insulin-like growth factor, it acts a lot like insulin in some respects. In some respects, it's different, but in others, it behaves like insulin. So it also helps to control growth hormone secretion in the pituitary gland, and this is the little gland right in the middle of your brain. And IGF works with these growth hormones to promote and develop bone and tissue. These hormones also affect how your body metabolizes sugar or glucose. So IGF and insulin can work together. This is the important thing, to rapidly reduce the level of glucose in the blood. All right, so what are the 5 lifestyle and dietary changes needed to improve metabolic syndrome? Well, number 1, in summary, we want to start on a low carbohydrate ketogenic diet as soon as possible. And I've made a comment here, beware of dirty keto. Well, let's just pause there for a moment and think about what dirty keto is. Well, there are a lot of products that get conveniently added into the ketogenic food lineup, which are not healthy. They're highly processed, highly inflammatory, and I would get you to reconsider a lot of these processed type products that are really unhealthy food groups that have been thrown into the term ketogenic diet. So because it's become such a commercial diet these days, that I feel there's part of it that is not focused on healthy food groups at all. You can go and Google for yourself dirty keto and get a pretty good idea of what these things are. Getting onto an exercise program, guys, I can't stress the importance of that. Find the time. You can't tell me that you don't have exercise to, a time in your day to spend between 30 and 45 minutes a day doing some exercise. It is critically important. If you can move, you can exercise. So get off your butts, get moving, get outside, get into the sunshine, go for a walk, get the heart rate up, get the circulation up. It clears your mind. There's so many benefits for that. Most mornings for me, I'm out on the road. We're fortunate that we live right opposite a nature reserve. So most mornings I'm out there for at least 45 minutes. Then I come back and I do some light resistance training. And that certainly keeps my mind and my body in shape. And I absolutely love it. I can't wait to get out early in the morning. And it's also my time where I start processing my day and what I've got to do, what are priorities for the day. And sometimes when you've asked yourself a question before you go for your walk, the answers come to you while you're out doing your exercise or when you're in the shower, having a bath. It's often those times when you've asked yourself those questions that you get those answers. You never really seem to get the answers immediately, but if you pose a strong enough question, you're going to get a pretty good answer. So they're really great times to get out. And a nice bit of information that I can share with you here as well about reducing glucose. And I remember listening to this one podcast about a woman who was talking about eating her meals outside in the direct, I'm not saying under the sun, but getting direct light into her eyes. And she was monitoring her glucose with a continuous glucose meter. And what she discovered was that when she ate inside after a meal, her blood glucose was way higher from eating the meal inside compared to eating the same meal outside. So something happens with the natural sunlight and the vitamin D outside that affects your glucose levels. Who would have thought eating outside in natural light would actually have such an impact on your blood glucose? And she did this over and over again, and it was copy and paste. Every time she ate outside, she measured her glucose, eating the same meal, just to confirm it would be half that score. So maybe if you get an opportunity to eat your meals outside, it's worth doing it because it seems to have an impact on your glucose. Learning to manage your stress. Well, what did we say about cortisol? High cortisol, which comes from stress sometimes, mostly, pushes up your glucose. If your cortisol is really high, you're going to push up the glucose. If your glucose goes up, the insulin goes up. So you're certainly going to use a management system to try. Exercise would be one of it. Meditation could be another. I don't mind what it is, but get it down. Get your stress levels down and learn how to manage your own stress. Monitor your health metrics at home, monitor your BP, your blood glucose, your body fat percentage. I know that you guys at New Image enjoy using the scale, the little Tanita body fat scale, which measures your visceral fat. Why does it measure visceral fat? Because it's a risk factor. Remember, we spoke about men and women that have those big fat bellies. That is part of the risk factors for metabolic syndrome. All right, so we want to make sure that we burn up that body fat and we don't contribute to that excess fat around the waistline. And that's that fat that is packed in between the organs, right, where it compromises the functionality of the organs, and you become a higher risk. I've also mentioned here, consider doing a liver detox. However, make sure to get proper advice from somebody qualified. Not any old liver detox will do. There's some really crazy stuff out there, very commercial. So if you need some help with that, let us know. I can help you with that, because you have to be very, very careful how you do this. It's not just a 2-day exercise and you're good to go. We have to be very, very careful. You may have a highly, highly toxic liver, and it's going to need gradual, incremental help, not just this boom bang approach to try and detox your liver. All right, that poor organ has to deal with so much. So don't overload it with extra stress. Guys, I've made available on the top of this is where Vinesh might want to join me on the call. I've made available a copy. It's a PDF copy of an ebook that I did a couple of years ago on colostrum. So if you wish to get a download of this book to get some more information on colostrum, it is available. Vinesh has got a copy of it, so he can assist you to get a copy of this. It's just general information that I've put together in this book that you might benefit from. And lastly, if you really want to get hold of me, that's my Facebook handle, Dr. Anthony Hoffer, on email, anthony@wellmedhealth.co.za. And obviously, Vinesh has got my details as well. So anybody that needs some help, give that some thought. And thank you for taking the time, everybody, to stay on the call with me. I hope you really, really found benefit here. I hope that the information was easy enough to digest and it wasn't too complicated. And I've really enjoyed my time with everybody here. So absolutely brilliant. Thanks again, New Image, for giving me the opportunity to sit here with you and share some valuable information with you. I really hope you felt some benefit from the call. And Vinesh, over to you, my friend.
Fantastic. And we can just show Doc some love in the chat box. Thank you so much for those messages. Doc, thank you. That was such incredible information. I've just shared your book in the chat box, so you can go and download that. It is in the chat box, or you can contact staff support, and they will send you the PDF for Dr. Anthony's little book. It is great. There's so much information in it. And I was thinking about how to close this call today, Doc. And I just thought, I'd share something, that's actually a fact. Almost 99% to 98% of people are actually born healthy. We're born healthy. There's nothing wrong with us, right? And right now, if you look at it, most of us are in a health condition. And what is the reason for that? Just one simple explanation. It's lifestyle. It's the lifestyle we choose that gets us to where we're actually sitting with a health issue. So what am I saying to you? I'm saying to you that you can try and correct that by using colostrum, right? Getting on the product, but not just taking it for a month or two. Stay on the product. Is a lifestyle change. So you're saying to yourself, I'm going to go onto this product, I'm going to stay on it for the rest of my life. And that is a good choice. Get onto the product and stay on it. If you are new on the presentation, you're not sure, you've maybe just found the flyer, you don't have a sponsor, contact the office. Our details are in the chat box. We are happy to assist you, right? So you can contact me via staff support. Just ask for me. I will contact you and help you through the process of getting these products and getting into the business. Doc, from our side, thank you so much. The information was absolutely incredible. We even have people from Malaysia that have tuned in. So thank you so much, Rachel from Malaysia. It's great to have you online. I don't know what time it is there, but thank you so much. And Doc, thank you. Is there anything else from your side that you'd like to share with everyone just before I close the call?
Yeah, I think I chose this topic quite carefully because if you remember down in Durban when we did our live presentation, we spoke about metabolic syndrome.
Yes.
And I think we had a tremendous response from your audience. And
Yeah.
what I decided to do was to really extend a little bit more about this, because I think many people found answers in their own dealings with high sugar and chronic health issues. So I decided, and I took quite a bit of time this time around to put the information together in a logical order, so that it it wasn't too complicated, because I don't like to get technically too, unless we're talking to other doctors and want more information, that's fine. But generally people just want the gist of what it is. But in my experience, this metabolic syndrome is a way of packaging all those conditions and issues. It's one term that involves so many different complications. So it can address a lot. And we've seen, Vinesh, I have over the years, how many people are battling with diabetes, battling with sugar. But the biggest, and let me make this comment now on this call, and hopefully everybody's still listening. What I don't see is people making a concerted effort into dealing with the change of their diet. They want the magic pill to just sort out everything, and they want their colostrum to deal with everything, but they don't want to make the changes in the diet. And that is sadly, interestingly, even with the current lifestyle diet that people have, they still make gains, but they are nowhere near in optimal health. So can you imagine, when you really pay attention to following the right information, because there's a lot of confusion out there with diet. And balanced diet. That's a lot of rubbish, man. Balanced. What does that mean? If it's okay to have 5 slices of bread with your piece of meat, that's perfectly balanced.
No, it's not.
It's insane. So there's a lot of education that is involved, and the source of the education, when somebody really understands it and it's presented well, and you gain that knowledge, you have the power to change everything.
Great.
So this is why I really enjoy chatting to everybody, because I want to be able to make things clear to people so that they understand it. We
100%.
seem to be getting there. They understand it, but I really hope everybody benefits. And I've seen lives come and go in the last year. I can promise you, being in private practice, it's actually quite sad to see how fast life disappears. People that come in with cancer and serious chronic diseases, if they'd only had information like this and made the decision way prior to that. Don't wait to get into a disaster. There's a thing called preventative medicine. While you have the opportunity and while you're still standing and breathing, please pay attention, because your health comes and goes so fast. It really does. So guys, give it everything. Give it. There's no better thing. You can't buy your health. I promise you. You can't buy it back, man. When you're that far down the line, time gets limited. So
and I think the best way to say it, Doc, is prevention is better than cure, right?
Yeah, we all know that saying, hey. But sadly, so what I see is everybody waits for the 11th hour of their health disaster before they wake up. Why? I have no idea. But anyway, we wish you all well.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Doc. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for the brilliant information to all our members online. Thank you so much for taking the time to join in. And I hope you use that information This presentation will be available on our Facebook page as well as our YouTube page. If you can't find it there, please contact the office. We'll be happy to assist you with that. And from my side, I'm the Business Development Manager for New Image South Africa, saying to you, have a great day. God bless you and have a great, great evening. Goodbye.
Cheers, everybody. Take care. Have a nice weekend.